Welcome back to another episode. We're here with Hannah Stoyel today. Would you like to say hi?
Hello, I'm Hannah Stoyel.
And can you tell us what pathway you're going through, and just so our audience know you a little bit better?
Yeah, so I am HCPC registered already, but my pathway to becoming a sports psychologist was through the international route, but still through the BPS, essentially. So the BPS, I kind of went to them and said, what do I do? And they said, you can go to the HCPC and ask for the international route. So I kind of followed those guidelines as much as I could to get that registration.
Cool. And with these podcast live stream, just like the others, we'll be talking about particularly how Hannah is doing during lockdown, the quarantine, her pathway, her route, and how that could potentially help you viewers watching. We've also got to bear in mind that around the coronavirus, a lot of people have lost their lives, and there's going to be a potential financial impact because of this. And I hope this brings some light relief, but also some help to you, the students, graduates, or maybe anyone else watching. So can you tell us a bit more about how you got into that international pathway?
Yeah, so as you can tell by my accent, I'm from the US originally, although everyone keeps telling me I have more of a British accent these days, so I'm not sure I can claim that much longer.
You say mate all the time.
I do now, and I say cheers. I wrote a WhatsApp this morning. He said cheers, and I was like, oh my gosh. But I've lived here about 5 years, and so basically, I did an undergrad degree in psychology in the US, and I'd done one term abroad in London at UCL. Loved it and wanted to move back. And my dad is British, and I have grandparents who live here, so I kind of loved the idea of coming back to the UK. I really liked the sports psychology master's options that the UK had to offer. In the US right now, it's a little bit more higgledy-piggledy how you become a sports psychologist, and it wasn't very clear to me what I wanted to, what pathway I would take if I stayed in the US. So I decided to come back to the UK, and I did a master's at St. Mary's, Twickenham. And what was really, I'll be blunt in saying that when you come from abroad, even if it's just the US, which is a world that's, divided by a common language, as we say, from the US to UK, I had no idea to even Google, was this course accredited? Was it not accredited? I think that was a theme running through my experience. Was it wasn't that I couldn't ask for help. I didn't even know what questions to ask. And so whenever I try and mentor anyone else in this pathway, I say, like, don't wait for someone else to kind of say, like, oh, what are your questions? Because as someone who comes from abroad, you just have no idea. So I did my master's at St. Mary's, Twickenham, paid the fees, was there, was then told halfway through the course that it wasn't accredited. And I had no idea what that meant. It was really hard. And I thought about trying to switch to a different program halfway through, but it was kind of too late at that point. I'd also had been accepted to Loughborough and a few other programs, but had chosen St. Mary's because the name of the course was Applied Sports Psychology. And so I was like, that sounds great. And so I did, I ended up finishing up my year there, and then went, well, I'll just, kind of naively coming from the US, was like, well, I'll just figure it out. I still have a master's degree. It'll still be valuable some way. Turns out not really. And so it was really, really tricky. And one of the hardest things was I did phone calls to the BPS saying, listen, like, I talked to the course director at that time was Stacey Winter, and Stacey and I agreed that, like, actually, so the following year was accredited after me. So they literally used the exact courses that I took. And they actually, I know they even submitted some of my personal coursework because I did quite well in the course as examples for the BPS. So it was like literally my coursework getting the program accredited. And then I still couldn't get accreditation. And I was like, well, is there one module I was missing? I could just redo one module. I tried 100 things in the BPS, basically just said, no, like you're just not accredited. You have to do another master's. And that was really, really tough. And I felt really stuck. I'll be, really honestly, like I was like, maybe I should just leave the UK. Maybe I should leave this field. It was really a roadblock. I felt like I was good at my job, but I had no way to circumvent this other than doing another master's degree, I did have chartered member status for my undergraduate degree. And one of the things I always tell people about they're coming from abroad is to ask for that, because actually I'd also been accepted to Roehampton for the master's, and they told me I'd need a conversion course. And so I didn't go there. If I had known to say, oh, actually, I don't need a conversion course, I have chartered membership through my undergraduate, graduate member status, sorry. I would have known to say that. But again, I didn't know. And a lot of what came out of my, to be honest, like slight complaints to St. Mary's is they said, well, you didn't ask. And I said, well, I didn't know what words to ask for.
Yeah.
And so actually my company, Optimise Potential, we just did an online event explaining a lot of these pathways to people, because it's really hard to know if you're from abroad what to even ask. So anyways, I eventually kind of started my work. I was a gymnastics coach for years, and I had been since I was about 16. So I kind of worked in that arena, and I started to build up a little bit of work in sports psychology, knowing I couldn't call myself a sports psychologist. And that was actually mentally quite tough. I felt almost fraudulent, even though I'd done the same master's course as so many other people. But I actually then went to Dave Fletcher up in Loughborough and said, listen, I'm not accredited, but will you supervise me for stage 2 as if I am? I still want to learn. I still want to get this right. Let's do it anyways. And he was really accommodating and really, really helpful. So I actually then did my stage 2 training. I just didn't submit it anywhere. I just did it for fun. And so after years of doing that, I got a few different roles. So I volunteered first with England Touch. I then got a job with Swim England, where I'm still currently working and love that work. And so I started to build up my portfolio a bit. I then actually also contacted the HCPC, who were like, well, actually, because they're not, the British Psychological Society, with British being the first word, they had other options in terms of how to become registered. And I didn't learn for about 2 years that they're the ones who own the protected name, sports psychologist. No one told me, I didn't know to ask. And so basically I said, well, can I submit basically every bits of like reflection, every bits of, hours of work I've done, references from Dave Fletcher, from England Touch, from England Swimming, like all of these places that I've been working. And I put together the most extensive audit of my life and went to the HCPC and said, what do you think? Would I qualify, based on your international route, which is like, and then also you have to have a degree from somewhere else, and then you prove you've done a certain amount of work in the field. And you have to prove you've done some work in the US. And I was lucky enough to have done enough kind of coaching and mentoring in the US previously to qualify me that way as well. It wasn't strictly sports psychology, but it was very, very similar. And so I submitted all that paperwork and got it all together. I had also just started a PhD at University College London at UCL, where my supervisor is HCPC registered as a clinician. And so she was able to also, you need someone to vouch for you. And so after a few months of us working together, she also did my reference saying this, I can vouch for competency and things like that. So I had a lot of people backing me in my corner who were really supportive, that basically eventually meant I could get HCPC registration. I'm still not BPS accredited, which is a little bit weird, but I did stage 2 as if I was. So for me, I feel like my training matches that of the BPS rather than BASES or ASP or something like that, the American version. So that's my long-winded way of how I got here. And I used to be, it was a hard journey. I won't lie.
Yeah, it's amazing, really. A lot of people probably in your experiences, but also back in home in the UK, don't understand or realize the accreditation route. And I think that's probably one thing that it really needs to get over, that accreditation is vital in many situations. Obviously, you talked about your own experience of accreditation. How is that very much different to in America, for instance?
So it's completely different. So in America, you become a licensed psychologist. And once you're, and it goes state by state. Sometimes you need different licensure. Actually, really crucially right now, people should know that like California, for example, have actually gotten rid of their licensure during coronavirus. So if you are someone, willing to give virtual support from abroad to anyone who needs like mental health support sports psychology,
Right.
whatever, you can actually start to do that. And I have family members who work in prison education and prison rights movement. And actually, like, if you're willing to volunteer time to work with mental health with inmates right now. So just as a side note, like the US right now is also trying to like up its kind of availability of practitioners, because it's very hard because they are state by state things. And so you become a psychologist. And once you're like a licensed psychologist, you get to kind of go, well, sport, clinical, educational, forensic. From, you know, and so that's very much a simplification. You know, obviously you could get a PhD specifically in something that would make you a specialist. But a lot of sports psychologists in the US are clinical psychologists who then just specialize in sport. So there's not as a direct route. There's a few programs that are specific to sports psychology now, but there's still not very many. I think probably still less in the UK, although the Applied Association of Sports Psychology, ASP, which is the American version of BPS, has just launched a different kind of accreditation to become a certified mental performance consultant, I think is what their protected term is called. So you can specific also kind of like, have you taken these courses? Have you done 400 mentored hours? Kind of similar, like stage 2.
It's more like performance psychology rather than sports psychology specific.
It is. And also because a lot of times you would train as a psychologist. So there's much less of the, oh, you know, is that depression or low mood? Do I need to pass that client on to a clinical psychologist? In the US, your training is kind of all encompassing. And so like my undergrad degree in psychology was rich in abnormal and clinical psychology. You know, I feel really confident in mental health as well. And part of the reason that my PhD is in clinical psychology is because I'm a psychologist first. I just happen to work with athletes. It's kind of how I feel about it.
Yeah. So it's not specific towards sports psychology in...
No, not really. It's starting to trend that way, but there's only a few programs that offer it. And a lot of them are PhD programs. And so you have to be really sure that's what you want, maybe out of undergrad, which can be hard for some people to make that decision.
Yeah. And talking about sport and the collegiate system in particular, how that's very much a sport, very much professional based, and obviously many parts of the world do not have that. I think the closest really we come to it in the UK is Loughborough. But watching and seeing something as simple as the ACC athletic championships and seeing the quality of the sports in terms of the sports performance, how is that different? How is sports psychology integrated within those kind of or almost semi-professional structures?
So a lot of universities will have sports psychologists now on staff. You know, like everything, it's a little bit further behind than the kind of physical care that we're giving athletes. But there are more and more and more universities that are hiring sports psychologists to be, you know, part of the team and part of the university and the structure. I actually know, for example, Arkansas does a really good job of, you know, they've got like their swimming pool and athletic facility, and then across the road is literally like not only a dining hall with food prepared by nutritionists, but upstairs is like the sports psychology and counseling center. So it's like really integrated, really cool. So there's a lot of universities like that. But I think as well, on a less formal level, what I think we sometimes don't realize from abroad about the US collegiate system is not only are there incredibly high caliber, high level athletes, but there's also space for athletes who are, to be blunt, like just decent at their sport to still do their sport. You know, so, you know, that's, you know, and kind of a national standard, even subnational standard in each sport. You could be going to university and doing that sport. And so there's an integration of everyone could do their sport through age 22.
Yeah.
And that's such a difference from most people stopping, you know, the big drop off at 12, a big drop off at 16, you know, going, no, like, let's keep going. I can be part of this. And even if it's just recreationally, even if it's not that seriously, or there is that really serious pathway. So there's lots of people who don't feel like they have to have a chance at the Olympics to warrant, well, I love this, I want to keep going. And that integrates the need for sports psychology at kind of just like the human psyche level. Like everyone's like, okay, how can I be better? How can I be my best me? How can I enjoy this the most? And I think that really changes the language around, oh, the mental side of performance. Everyone can relate to that a little bit more because just so many more people are involved in sport.
So you mentioned that you work for Optimise Psychology.
Optimise Potential is the name.
Optimise Potential. Sorry about
Yeah,
that.
that's all right.
How did you find that transition from being a student into effectively a practice of sort?
Yeah, so I founded Optimise Potential, so it is my baby, and it was, it basically, I had kind of a, the dream is that it can be a team of practitioners, and not even necessarily just in sports psychology. We refer to sport nutritionists as well. I'm always keen to find other people for that team in other disciplines as well. When I was a student, as much as you try to prepare someone for your first face-to-face client, it's really hard. The first one is always a little bit shocking. I was lucky enough for my first one to be a client who I really gelled with, and it gave me a lot of confidence, which is really helpful. But it's not always like that at the first go. So I kind of, I started small. I always say to people, start grassroots. So because I was a swimmer growing up, I was also a gymnast. So it's part of the reason I coach gymnastics. So those are my two sports. I knew some coaches in the area. So I actually went to them and said, can I do a workshop for you? So a good friend of mine let me come in and do a workshop, and he had, I think the swimmers chipped in a little bit of money, and the club chipped in a bit of money, and I think I was barely paid anything, but I was so excited. So I did my first ever workshop. It was like October after I graduated from my master's. And I think it was probably rubbish, but we all learn. It's a learning process. And I just grew from there, and I did the workshop. I was still coaching at the same time. And I always say is like, find something that can support your building practice. So I was coaching a lot, and I was doing a few workshops. I then found the volunteer role at England Touch, and I gave time for that. And I then, in my days, I would build up my website, making sure those looked really good, make sure my CV looked nice. I made myself a goal of try to do something in sports psychology every day. It doesn't have to be the whole day. It may not be realistic, but do something in sports psychology every day. And then you can kind of see, I'm really lucky to say that, every day now I do sports psychology all day, every day. And that's such an amazing blessing. And I think that I just started with, so my very first year, I always like to say I literally did like one workshop that October. I then did a few free sessions for some gymnasts where I was coaching, just on like imagery and self-talk, really basic things, just mental skills. I then got my first kind of 2 clients. I think my first year I had like 2 or 3 clients and did like 2 or 3 workshops. Like it was really slow. I actually did not get the job originally with England Swimming, but they allowed me, I kind of got like the assistant position, and I kind of just through hard work and grit kept working there. And I've kind of moved up the chain, and now I'm in their lead sports side. And basically I ended up kind of going that on my CV of going, I work for England Swimming. It really helped people go, oh, she must know what she's talking about, which is so funny, but that's how the world works. And so I also went to a ton of conferences. And basically, I went to the ASP conference in Orlando a few years ago. I met people there who actually got me my job at Reading Football Club. I always go to Supporting Champions conference with Steve Ingram. That's a great conference. And my first year there, I took the delegates list, all 200 people on that list, and I cold called or emailed like every single one, and was just like, how can I learn from you? What's going on? How can I be of assistance? And I actually met Tim Harper from Equity Sport there. So I started just making little connections. And then slowly but surely, I just kind of built up small, like I got, the next year, I think I had more like 10 clients. And then once you kind of get to 10 clients, word of mouth, it kind of explodes. So now we have a waiting list, and now Optimise Potential is busy. And I have 2 other lovely practitioners who work with me there, Serena McLeod and Hannah Winter. And they're phenomenal. And so I kind of just really was slow about it. It took me like 3 years to really build up slowly. I had help from my parents. My parents paid for help me design my logo. There's help that goes along the way that just takes time and energy and effort. But if you have something like coaching, exactly, thank you, mom and dad, they're really helpful. But if you have something like coaching that pays the bills, you can you can build something you really care about. And one of the things I've really learned from Hannah Winter actually is don't say yes to everything. If it's the right thing, then it will, and build you and build your brand. You can learn from it, because in the beginning, you'll say yes to anything. All the free work, all the travel, you'll just do it. And that's fine in the very, very beginning, but you do need eventually to like set some sort of boundaries, and you need to go, what's right for my practice? What do I want this to be? How does it fit into the vision, basically?
Yeah, so that's very powerful stuff you mentioned there. And you've obviously gone down the entrepreneurial route into your practice. The one question I really want to ask is, what does your general day look like as a practitioner?
Yes. So I'll give you my day, like not, well, I can give you Corona version and not Corona version.
Okay.
So Mondays, you know, normally I go out to Reading. I'm lucky enough to work with the Women Academy out there, who are phenomenal. And I go out there, I kind of do one-to-one sessions all day with the girls. So they get pulled out of class, they get, you know, or they kind of come, you know, they come during their breaks, they come during lunchtime, and we just have quick chats. I then go to training in the afternoon, help put out cones, talk to the physio. First lesson in sports psych, get to know the physio, because that connection can be really helpful to help your athletes. You know, to catch up with the coaches. So I'm there on Mondays. It's a long commute. So I'm then on the train for about 90 minutes, or a bus and 2 trains for 90 minutes. And that's really where I do kind of the entrepreneurial bits. It's invoicing, emails, updating the website. Somehow there's always a typo on the website. It's just like inevitable, you know, updating those things. Maybe we have a new event coming up. You know, it's constant kind of re-going. I have a rule for myself that any new client that comes to the website, they get a response from me within 12 hours, sometimes 24 if it's sent on a Sunday, because they might email everyone in London or everyone in the UK. And I want to be there for them first. And because people are coming to you because they need something, and waiting several days can feel like a really long time when you're in need. So I try to be really respectful of that and saying, I'm here, I'm listening, how can I help? So that's kind of Mondays. In Corona world right now, I'm putting out a series of videos with Helen Davis, our other sports psychologist at Swim England, where we are doing kind of educational sports psych videos that are posted on Twitter every week or two. And these have to do with, you know, both kind of well-being and the performance side of sports psychology. So I've learned how to make animated videos during all this, which has been a great skill. And then I guess the rest of my week is a combination of PhD work. So I'll go to UCL in non-Corona times, and now I'm at home doing PhD work. My topic is eating disorders in athletes. So I've actually finished all my data collection. I'm super lucky that I managed to finish in February, which I didn't know was by the skin of my teeth, but it was. And so I just have lots of analysis to do on that now. And then every afternoon, I usually have Tuesdays were always my in-person client day. So I had an office in central London near UCL to see in-person clients. I have a rule for myself that I try not to do more than 3 clients in an afternoon. I find that if after 3, I flag and I'm not giving my best to the last client. So I do about 3 clients then. And then the rest of the week is kind of a combination of mostly virtual clients, because Swim England means that I'm working all around the country. So I'll maybe do, you know, PhD work all day, 2 clients in the evening. I was teaching at New Bucks University last term. That was really fun. So I was going out and teaching there. I've done a few guest lecturings at Roehampton and UCL. So maybe some teaching. And then every afternoon, because everyone wants an afternoon slot in sports psychology, because everyone wants after school and after training. So it is one of these things where you have to learn that you're gonna have busy evenings. So I usually do, you know, a 4 p.m., a 5 p.m., a 6 p.m., maybe even a 7 p.m. client, depending on where the slot just fits up. And basically, I always say that every single thing about my week is that I'm always doing more emails and invoicing, because the company needs attention every day. It's like a newborn. It constantly needs updating and support and things like that. I guess then also my only other thing that's maybe unique about my week is that I don't see any clients on Fridays. I travel a lot I'm at a swim meet, I'm at a track event, I'm somewhere else. So I try not to do, otherwise I have to constantly move my clients on Friday. So I try not to see them. It also gives me time to catch up on paperwork, but it really crucially means that any client that can only fit you in 8 p.m. on Friday evening, maybe isn't that invested in your work together. And so I actually kind of say, that's my time. You know, if you want to make this work, let's do another day. And I will offer some Saturday mornings at, you know, at a push, but I'm often traveling, like I say, so I try not to do it too much. But I usually, one of the greatest things I get to do, one of my favorites, is sometimes on Saturdays, because I'm also a qualified gymnastics coach, I can work with kids in a gym on mental blocks for certain skills, and I can actually get in there and do sports psychology and do hands-on coaching. So I'll sometimes do that on a Saturday. So it's kind of a combination of, like, I would say 2 to 3 clients a day, and then everything else is fit in PhD work and emails.
Yeah, you sound like a very busy person.
I am a busy person, but it ebbs and flows, you know, like with the sports seasons, it ebbs and flows. There are weeks that I am working 12-hour days, 6 or sometimes 7 days a week if I'm traveling. And then there are weeks where actually, you know, maybe we've just finished a massive championship. So I've got no swimmers who want to see me. PhD is at a bit of a lull. And actually I'm like home at 4 p.m. on Tuesday going, guess I'll make some cupcakes, you know? So I think it's kind of a funny one. So I think it's one of these things that it is the hardest bit of my job, I would say, for me personally, is to get that balance right, because you could end up with a real lull in your schedule and you're like, oh, I'll fill it. I'll take someone off the waiting list. But you don't know if the following week someone comes back. And I'm still learning how to get that right.
I think that's really interesting. You said about learning on the job, and interesting how you mentioned, as a sports psychologist and a gymnast as well, how that you're able to combine those two in a way that supplements one another within a training session itself. I find that very, very interesting, very cool thing. Talking about how your work and how you got into work and set up your own business and gone down the entrepreneurial route, although probably in the modern world we hear that too much, probably online, saying I'm an entrepreneur, and it's like we're really in front of a laptop. Did your expectations whilst as a student, was that exactly the same what happened? And do you think university helped you for the real world?
You know, I think I thought I would get a job at a big organization and work in the same place Monday through Friday. It's a little hard to say. So actually, I was lucky enough. My parents are actually both physicians, and my mom worked in private practice and my dad works in academia. And so I could actually, in a very similar way, see the two options growing up. So I actually did feel quite prepared. When I launched into private practice, I knew it would be hard, but I also knew that there'd be great dividends to come from it that include kind of a flexibility in the long run. To me, it was very much like, sow your seed now and eventually this will kind of give back. It's almost giving back now. It's a little bit more work still has to go into it. I think I was pretty prepared. It's hard. I think one of the trickiest things for people of our generation coming into this is we have a structured accreditation process, but the generation above us maybe didn't. So we'd have people come in and say, here's how I did my career. But it would kind of be like, oh, hey, I like graduated, and then all of a sudden, you know, UK athletics offered me a full-time job. And you were like, wait, that's great, but how can I do that? And so and they just kind of walked into things that were it just was different. And so I think it's really hard there are great role models once you can learn from people, but you don't get to see the struggle of practitioners a generation above you of like, how did I break into this? But I kind of I was lucky enough, my grandmother's also a psychotherapist, so is my aunt. They're both in private practice. I was really able to learn from them. And I also, because I was not accredited for the first kind of 18 months, almost 2 years, I was like, well, I can't apply for a job at the EIS. Like the first thing it says is like, you must have this accreditation. And I was like, well, I just don't have that. So I was like, well, I'll go a different way and I will get experience some other way. And it was kind of a necessity, but I also realized it's also what I wanted. Because I do love having the combination of some of my work is within an organization, some is very entrepreneurial, some is academia. I
Yeah.
love having those three hats. I actually don't think I would change that for anything, but I think I didn't realize how many hats I would wear. You know, one of the hardest things actually that no one taught me was, you know, when I go to Reading, I'm the only sports psychologist, but you know, I'm feeding back to the coach and the managers there. You know, I have a line manager, and same with Swim England. But then I go to Optimise Potential, and I'm the boss. And
Yeah.
it's like, oh wait, now I'm in charge. And so there's a little bit of kind of learning how that goes, and I think that's something that, you know, you could do all the group projects in the world at university and it's just not the same, because actually in the real world, it's actually easier in a lot of senses because there's a hierarchy and you kind of know, you don't all have to do equal amounts of work on something. You do bring your expertise. So
Right.
I've learned how to, you know, if you're really bad at PowerPoint, you don't make a PowerPoint, you know, but at school you do. You have to be part of that PowerPoint. So I think that it's a question of, you know, how do you take what you learn at school, but then just really realize that it's like school teaches you like how to learn more than actually, not even necessarily the content. It helped me ask the right questions coming out of university, I think.
That's I find it's quite interesting what you mentioned about school being basically prepares you how to learn and not necessarily how to work inside the actual work environment. And it's also interesting how the route you've gone down, how you've almost like, if I can't find a way, I'll make a way.
Yeah.
In terms of quoting the Carthaginian general Hannibal Barca, although I think that's a completely different situation involved there. So talking about finding that way or making that way, and you mentioned the obstacles of your accreditation being one of them. What other major obstacles did you have?
So I think, I mean, I think one of the things that's hard in the very beginning is you have to overcome, I think it's this kind of like, you think you know what you're doing, but you know you have more to learn. And I think when you start out, you know, you don't want to do any harm. You know, that's the mantra of what we're, you know, you got to be in a caring profession, like do no harm, right? You know, so you're really conscious that people are putting their well-being kind of in your hands. And I think that is scary at first. So I think it's about, you can only get better on the job. So I think it's about how do you find mentors and people to talk to who will really give it to you straight. And one of the things that I've really learned is like, don't, you know, I'm not defensive about my work, but I am quietly confident about my work. I know I do a good job. And I think getting to that stage was a hard obstacle, because you can sit there in a session and a client starts telling you something and you can go like, what if I don't know how to do this? And it's going, trust the process, trust your training, trust, you know how to do this. And for me, the solution was very much like, go get more training. So I've done CBT courses. Even when I finished stage 2, I found another supervisor just to have to hand to ask questions about. And so I'm constantly kind of aware that some of the biggest obstacles can be just a bit of your own fear. And I think it's a combination of your own fear, but then also without experience, you don't get hired, but you need experience to get experience kind of obstacle. So I think it's like, well, I need to start really small and not realizing that realizing that those small things, like, you know, a workshop for the local, you know, amateur running club, just, you know, done at the pub down the road, is absolutely teaching you things. And invite questions and invite hard stuff, and don't go, well, this is what the science says, therefore I'm going to shut down. Go like, hold on, let me really listen to people and really understand what each unique experience is about. But remembering that kind of classic saying that like the plural of data is not anecdote, you know, making sure you're still going back to the literature. And I think one of the hardest things for me is, so I have Richard Keegan's book on my shelf over there. And I remember reading that and feeling like, oh my God, I'm not good at my job because this is so perfect and so written, so great. And I'm not quite sure if I'm a constructivist. I'm not sure how I view the world, and getting worried about that. Yeah. But actually realizing with a quiet confidence that you can kind of create what's right for you. Once you become an expert in these things, you can then decide what works. You have to become an expert first. So you need to gain that confidence that you know it. But then you can say, actually, the reality is the amount of times I've given a session on a pool deck and the client starts changing out of their swimming costume and you're like, oh, could you wait until we finish talking, and things like that, that you're like, this is not in any textbook. So you have to kind of get that confidence. And I think that can be a real roadblock in the very beginning. And the temptation can be to ignore the learning process because it's scary, but you have to be open to it and really digest it before you kind of push it, not away, but transform it into what you need it to be. I hope that makes some sense.
Yeah, makes good sense. You said a good lot of seen from a lot of your experience how you can apply that upon to potentially any of the students who are, or anyone who's literally watching this. We're going to talk more now about the more about quarantine itself and the questions related around well, not related around coronavirus, because we're not qualified to talk about that, but talk about your own experiences of working into the lockdown and quarantine itself. So how are you finding working in the quarantine?
So on a very personal level, I'm traveling less, which is actually kind of nice for me. I feel very lucky that I still have a job to do. I will therefore have a roof over my head and things like that. And so that's really nice. Sorry. I think one of the nice things as well is I'm getting actually more teamwork, because we're able to do virtual kind of consultations with other sports psychologists and get other ones involved, where maybe we could only afford one of us to go to an event. So those are kind of some of the really big pluses. It's hard though, in the sense that you don't know what's coming the following week. So when lockdown first started, I actually got very ill. The first start of lockdown was what I think was coronavirus. So that slowed me down a little bit, but I'll fine now. And then I kind of went into, there was a little bit of a panic for some of my athletes really wanted to talk about what's going to happen. But those sessions I actually found really challenging because we didn't know what was coming next. And I could just kind of be there to let them offload. But we're really kind of like, okay, we're still in coronavirus time. There wasn't really a lot we could do other than teaching grounding techniques and breathing and trying to create productive scheduling, but also realizing that your worth as a human being is not dictated by how productive you are. As a side note, I saw a great tweet the other day that was, you're not just working from home right now, you're working from home during a global crisis. So being really kind to yourself and understanding those things. So a real journey, personally, for me to understand that and to pass along to my clients. I then had this funny lull where all of my clients were kind of like, this is kind of nice. I have a bit of a break. I don't have to go to school. I'm not training. I get to sleep in. And then we kind of went through another transition of, maybe we can start heading back to things. Maybe we can kind of think about, what is going to come next. We now have a year to the Olympics. And so I've actually, in the last 2 weeks, now started kind of shifted from what was much more just stress offload, well-being, just having chats, to more kind of performance psychology side of sports psychology in the last few weeks. So that's shifted a little bit. And I've done a few more kind of online workshops for different teams, and things like that. And because one of the tricky things right now as well is, people don't have, individual households, but also organizations have a little bit less money. So they're also we're trying to figure some of that out. What work do I do for free? What work do I need to charge? Because it's how I make a living. So it's been kind of ups and downs figuring that all out, but it's getting kind of calmer. And one of the great things is that I have more time to work on my PhD, which does need to be finished. And actually, as we head into kind of take 2 of the Olympic year, I know I'll be very busy. So I'm actually quite grateful for the time I have to work on my PhD.
That's really interesting what you said there, talking about working towards the Olympics and this new idea of having this really nice time, but also this idea of project restarting the tournaments. How are we going to restart it from a business point of view? How is this going to work? So Yeah, it's one of those tricky questions really
I
at the
know.
moment. How do we restart the league? And many competitions will see this as a potential opportunity to, if you like, get on television, I suppose, because there's no other sports around. And you've seen that with Aussie rules, how the amount of people suddenly becoming Aussie rule fans because it's the only sport.
Marble racing. Have you seen the marble racing?
No, enlighten me on that.
It's a YouTube sensation. John Oliver has actually just decided to sponsor it, and it's literally marbles racing with commentary, and it has like 100,000 fans now. It's really something. It's hilarious. I recommend marble racing.
I've seen some of the commentators like do in social commentary.
I love it. Yes, it's so good.
The one about Mabel the dog as well.
Yes.
You've seen that? So
excellent.
So talking about quarantine itself, what were your thoughts and feelings when you first learned that we were going to go down into lockdown here in the UK?
So actually, I felt like it was slightly delayed. I had a really hard time the week leading up to it because I work in schools. I had a real personal decision to say, do I still go to these schools, or is that not the right thing to do for the safety of the students, for my safety, the safety of my household? And that was really hard. I found that once the government made a decision, I went, those are the rules, I follow the rules. So that was okay. It was actually right before that was most challenging of, do I go on that visit? Do I go to that school? Is that the right thing? And that was really tricky. You know, at the end of the day, it's human lives. This is what we have to do. This is not what anyone would ever want, by any stretch of the imagination, but it's the reality of where we are. And so I'm really watching my own self-talk, if you will, on, I wish it was somewhat different. I wish we could do this. I can't wish things to happen. And you can't wish your life away. You can't wish it was next week. It is right now. So I think just going, what can I do to make the most of right now? And the most of right now maybe is, for me, I can finish a PhD that actually would have taken me till next April, will hopefully only take me till December now, which is great. But also going, how can I also spend more time with my husband and have more kind of self-care in my life where I'm a really busy person? I don't always have that time. So I think that there's a huge amount of realization that goes into what's important. And I think we all oscillate between going, this is really upsetting because human lives are being lost. This is upsetting because the economy is struggling. This is upsetting because, I personally am going to find something tricky and I'm going to struggle. And then feeling oddly like, oh, I shouldn't care about my own struggles because they're nothing in the grand scheme of other things. And there's a huge amount of understanding that your feelings are valid. You are allowed to be upset that there's no football on TV. I'm a Tottenham fan. Actually, for us, this season maybe being canceled wasn't the worst thing, but I still miss football, and so understanding that you are allowed to be upset, and you don't want to go out and go, my problems are worse than anyone's, but the saying in my household is, we don't compare each other's pain. And that is our household mantra. And so realizing that, you can be upset, but how can you turn that kind of feeling of upset into something productive, not in the sense that it has to be like, I'm going to change the world, but productive in learning what's right for you. And one of the things I'm working with athletes on right now is saying, how do you learn best? How are you motivated best? Because we can use this time to understand what motivates us and what works for us, and how do we respond best to a situation, to a crisis. Because if we can understand that about ourselves, we can unlock a lot of things that we can take out of lockdown as well. So if you have an athlete who's not willing to exercise right now and just demanding they exercise, that doesn't work. If we could just demand of ourselves to be productive all day, every day, I would have no job. This would be really easy. We could all just go, I demand I do all the laundry and all the cooking and my PhD and everything. It doesn't work like that. But how do I respond to my own self-talk? How do I understand motivation? When should I be awake? When should I be sleeping? When should I be relaxing? Do I set timers? Do I not set timers? Can my phone be in the room? What are my obstacles to my day-to-day life? Because all of a sudden we don't have people looking over our shoulders, and we don't have tight training schedules to keep us on track. So I think there's a lot about learning how you learn best and how you're motivated and why you're motivated. And that's been a bit of my mission as well during this time, is when the thoughts creep into, I'm really upset, going, that's valid. And now how can I use this time to be best for me?
So do you find that one of your obstacles within lockdown is the obstacle to productivity then? Did I get that right? Or?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I hope he doesn't mind me sharing. My husband has struggled with that more. That's actually been something that he's a master's student in sports psychology right now. So he's also on this pathway, and watching him go through, he's had to redo his ethics application. He can't do his dissertation project he wanted to do. That's really hard. For me, I'm really quite lucky in that productivity isn't something I struggle with. Instead, actually, for me, one of the biggest things I struggle with is like almost the other side of going, I don't have 2 hours of commuting time, I should fill that with work. I shouldn't necessarily, I should, and realizing that, making dinner for my family is also important to me, and other things like that, and getting that right, and time to call home, and connecting with people in that sense, and calling my grandparents and making sure everyone's okay. Realizing that those are also productive uses of time. Yeah. So it's kind of learning what is productivity for me has been an obstacle.
That's something we've talked about with in the pilot episode with Richard. He said sometimes being not productive is mentally productive as well.
Yeah.
And it's quite interesting. You said that as well. It's interesting. What we're going to say, a few points that you've talking about, for instance, we want to know, trust the process. What is your philosophical ideas and around sports psychology? And when do you need to adapt them? You can comment down below. That'd be really cool. And really the second question we really want to know is, what are your obstacles to productivity? Are you trying to be too productive? Are you not being productive enough? If you guys, anyone watching, could whack that down in the comments below, that would be really helpful. Also, if you could subscribe, that would really help the DCEP Northern Hub out a lot. So talking about our next question, really, what are the greatest threats and challenges to yourself personally regarding the quarantine?
I think that I gotta be honest, I'm really finding this time to be one that I found a way to enjoy, and I found a way to view it as a challenge. It's been, commuting was always such a hard thing for me, because I just do so many hours in a day, sometimes 4+ hours of commuting in a day, and that's not even leaving London. So I think that was an element that I'm kind of viewing as like a wonderful, like, well, I've got that extra time in my day to be productive, whatever that means. But one of the greatest things, I think it's made me a better psychologist, and that's been a really scary and exciting challenge, is I don't have a sport competition to prepare anyone for. I have to just be good at what I do in the essence of kind of in a psychology sense. There's no way of going, did you try that idea at training out? Did you talk to that coach about it? Did you put this into practice and then feed that back to me? Nothing's happened between our session and the last session. So I need to be able to use Socratic questioning, other tips and tricks that I've learned along the way about being a really good listener, and especially for new clients I've gotten in this time. There are clients I've gotten in this time, we've never met. I've never seen them compete. I know very little about them. And I get new clients who are like, well, I can't get myself off the couch. So how do I help them? And going, okay, how do you learn best? How are you motivated best? How do I help you through that? And the power of the rapport that you have to build through a computer screen. And someone saying, I've got nothing to talk about, and you've got an hour ahead of you, and you're like, all right, how am I most valuable to this person right now? How do I help them?
Is that more of a challenge is it different to communicate via the webcam here rather than talking to them face to face?
So I do a lot of work on the webcam normally. I don't mind it, and I think it's actually realistic. I think a lot of athletes don't have time to travel to you, and office space is really expensive and hard to come by. I don't mind that. I think the real challenge is, if internet connection isn't good, that can be really hard. But I think that the biggest challenge is really, so staying calm when it's really bad connection. I had a new client start. I couldn't hear it for the first 20 minutes. Kept dropping every 4 seconds. Kept dropping out. Had to, that was stay calm. It's okay. And realizing that there's just not a lot you can offer in terms of you can't change that. It's uncontrollable. So I think realizing those things, but then there's also an element of just going, you've got nothing to prepare for. So usually I would help clients, set goals for something in a way that, in the sense of setting outcome and process goals, sure, but also you just have something you're working towards together. And that can be a lot of times why athletes come to you. So just realizing you don't have that now, and athletes might just are just upset. They're not really sure why. It's still in the realm of sports psychology, but it just looks very different than what we're used to. So I think the challenge has been for me just to be an even better listener than I was before, and even more creative, in our sessions.
Is it important to be creative whilst within this quarantine period as someone who works in sports psychology?
Oh, hugely. I think creativity has been like the number one thing that I've tapped into, because whether it's the videos that we're doing for Swim England and doing, they can only be 2 minutes and 20 seconds, and because it need to fit on Twitter. So how do you make a creative thing there that's also so it's accessible for those aiming for the 2021 Olympics? Or are you, is it a 12-year-old who's just loves swimming and really wants to, keep doing it? And all of those people have to be kind of tapped into, but then also the creativity in the sessions. And so much of what I'm doing right now is finding out what works for each client in terms of like an awareness. I think so much change can come from self-awareness. And when we're aware of how we react physiologically, psychologically, in an emotional sense, and also kind of a fight or flight sense, and what's happening, then we can change stuff. So using this time to go, like we say, like what obstacles stop you. So one of the questions I always ask clients is, if I assign them homework, or I say, I want you, let's say it's journaling. Lots of people think, oh, we should all be journaling or meditating right now. I say, now what obstacles do you foresee that would mean the next time we get in this call, you tell me you haven't done it? And so we talk through a lot of that, and maybe it's just that I didn't want to. Oh, that's fine. Let's talk about that. Why don't you want to? And so really getting that sense, but also going, your last competition, what did your body feel like? What did your mind feel like? What did your thought process sound like? And going, now, did that work for you? And so much of what you're trying to do, at least for me, like my personal kind of mantra as a sports psych is be an ally. So I'm trying to be an ally to my clients and just say, how can I be here for you? Especially my younger clients, who are 17, 18, going, I'm an adult who is an ally for you. Because right now you might feel like you can't talk about that you're struggling because you do have a roof over your head. You're not dying, and that can be really hard right now. And so how can I be an ally and go, I'm here to help you, but I'm also here to kind of say, this is not, your feelings are valid. This is not the end. This is temporary. This is not forever. But also I understand that it might feel that way. That's a lot of thoughts in one, but that's kind of what I'm trying to be doing right now.
No, that's really good, because you've gone really into depth, and I think people watching or listening this would want you to go into depth about this and your thoughts and feelings and your personal experiences during this quite potentially novel, once in 100 year threat to, within this 21st century. Really, we talked about your greatest threats and challenges towards you personally, the obstacles evolved to you within lockdown. But how is the quarantine affecting the profession of sports psychology, and what is the greatest threats and challenges towards the profession in your opinion?
Yeah, so I think one of the hardest things is always that, when people run out of money, they seem to keep the physio and get rid of the psychology. And I don't blame them for it. I understand the thought process behind doing that. But I always felt like, while we're being more accepted, we're not considered, to use the term of a time, we're not like essential. I think a lot of teams see us as like an added bonus. And so because we're not necessarily essential in all spheres of sport, we're the first to be cut during when the, just times get tough financially and with all this. And also because of that, usually they just hire one sports psychologist. There's very rarely a team of sports psychs, which would be really helpful because we can learn from each other, but also, certain clients just gel with different practitioners, and that's totally normal. And so I think in this time, as people kind of cut budgets, we might end up with a point of people going, we've got a lot of new people graduating, but maybe like a few less jobs in that sense. But I think on the flip side of that, a lot of people are seeing the mental side of day-to-day life and understanding that actually with the right mindset about things, I like to call it mindset more than the mental side, because I think mindset is slightly more accurate. Is I think that if you have the right mindset about something, then you end up with an ability to see something as a challenge rather than a threat, to be productive in this time, to enjoy movement and exercise, to reap the benefits of this confinement. But I think that we have to hope that, we have to, hope and also educate different organizations by going, we can set this mindset, and we can do it for coaches. We can do it for managerial teams. We can do it for the athletes. We can also then be on the ground and working one-to-one, but actually having different people for coaches and different people for athletes may be really helpful. So realizing what we have to offer. And I think one of the biggest challenges for sports psych in general is that I'm not sure people know what we do. And so people will hire a sports psychologist for me to teach goal setting and a relaxation technique. And I'm like, I can do that. I can do a lot more though, and so helping people realize that. And so I think that if we come out of this showing our worth and our value virtually, we can do all of our work virtually. I already did 70% of mine virtually, and I was very successful that way. So realizing, keep us involved. We're still there. And also, the classic saying, you don't only have to come to us when things have gone wrong. If you come to us now, we can help prepare you to going back into competition, and we can help prepare you for that. And we could be proactive and not just reactive. And I think we're actually at this amazing cusp of going, oh my gosh, we have a clean slate in which we could have sports psychology be a proactive movement rather than, oh crap, we fired 3 managers, we better bring a sports psych in.
Yeah. It's I think when we interviewed Ross Shand for the DCEP Northern Hub podcast, he said, I can fix something, but that's only a third of what I do.
Yeah.
And I think that was quite powerful what you said as well. And this idea of, oh no, I've sacked the manager, let's try and fix something in, is not necessarily what psychology is all about. That's only a small percentage of what it's about.
No, and actually I was I was thinking about the challenges I've had in this time, and one of the, as a sports psychologist, as a psychologist, you're not there to offer solutions, right? You are there to gently nudge thought processes and challenge different kind of maybe core beliefs, if that's how you work, to get people towards a solution that works for them. And that solution might be a place of acceptance. It might be a logistical change, whatever that is. And I found one of the challenges in this time is to stay true to that. I have teenagers who are having fights with their parents, and I'm kind of there like, all right, what should we do? And I'm like, oh wait, no, that's not my, and being really careful about things like that. And so I think, be an ally and not the person offering the solution. And I think that's often why, parents or coaches will say to me, like, I said that same thing to them. They didn't take it from me. And I went, well, because you just shoved a solution into them. I'm not there to do that. And I'm there to be an ally and to listen. And we create a solution pathway together, and I think that has been something that this time has been a challenge for me, just to be really careful to not do that and really be client led and listen and say, what do you think? I will say to a client, who's like, I don't even talk about today. And I'm like, how can we use this time together then? Like, tell me, I'm as much as, I might know more about sports psychology, but I always say, the client is the expert on them. So tell me, teach me about you, and I think that can be, especially for a young person where adolescents get the short end of the stick all the time when they're constantly told that they don't know anything because they're young. Well, they know themselves. And they know themselves incredibly well. And actually really valuing that can be incredibly empowering to them. And you are such a better practitioner for just being honest and going, I don't know what to do today because you don't have a competition coming up. I felt like last session we covered a lot of things. Today you seem in a really good place. What do you think you should tell me about that would be impactful? And if they say, I don't know, there are other ways you can ask that questions. You can ask questions like, of the past 10 days, how many days, on a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being great, we're below a 4. What made them bad? What, because it's recognizing, going back to that self-awareness, if you can recognize what gives you a good day and what gives you a bad day, we can't promise every day is a good day, but we can start to go, okay, how can I create trends? I had a great swim coach at uni, and he used to talk about trending. Each day doesn't have to be great, but you want to trend in the right direction. And I will often ask my athletes, now, if we zoom out and say, instead of looking day by day and the little squiggles up and down, we zoom out and look week by week, month by month, year by year. Are you trending the direction you want to go in? Are you continually to improve and enjoy your sport? If yes, then we're okay. Let's zoom out. And now, once we've zoomed out, knowing that, how do we then zoom back in and make sure that the day-to-day blips are less dramatic? And that's also other ways I would talk to an athlete about this.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it as almost if it's a spreadsheet and seeing the trends go up, and are you trending in that right direction? That's quite an interesting perspective, a new way for me anyway to hear, especially as quite a lot of athletes now are performance led and analytically led. That's a new and different, interesting way of looking at it. So that's really quite cool. Yeah.
And I have a lot of athletes who find it really helpful. And I have a lot of athletes who will write zoom out on their water bottles just to realize like today's practice might have been really rough, but if I zoom out and look at the big picture, it's okay. And that's a really helpful exercise and a really simple kind of cue card that you can use in training.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you a question now. We got a lot of people asking this, especially graduates and students in particular, especially as they're looking at the quarantine in itself and seeing probably potential effects upon the field of sports psychology and sports science in general, and looking potentially beyond and think, oh no, what's going to happen here? So obviously you're quite entrepreneurial and you found ways to potentially get CPD and earn money related to and ethically as well towards sports psychology. What advice would you give those potential graduates and students in particular?
So I would definitely say is, while you should expand to other sports and performance areas besides the ones it is kind of helpful to start in the one you do know, because you probably have connections there. So, things like, being a volunteer team assistant for different university kind of sports can be helpful. I know a few people who started that way. But for me, I think the first step in realizing is once you have that degree, like you are valued, you should charge money. So I think it's fine to volunteer to make connections, but recognizing like you can charge, what you feel is appropriate. You can charge different amounts. And so that's the first step, because you can't offer free work to people if you haven't charged other people who can afford you. So I think that's always like my first message is like, charge money. It's okay. This is what you're doing for a living. A physio would charge for their work as well. But go super grassroots, look in the local council and find what teams are out there, what Sunday leagues, what are we talking about? Find coaches who are interested and want to buy in to what you do, and have your kind of pitch of like, what can you offer? And what you can't offer is life-altering, counseling in one session, but like be really honest about what you can offer and why are you better than the next person, basically. Understanding the business side of this is really important. And I think sometimes when we're in helping professions, we feel really awkward about that. And we have to be upfront and go, I'm good at what I do. I have a trade to offer. So, you know, going to local clubs and emailing and saying, I could create online worksheets for your kids to do that are related to sports psychology. I could direct you towards a series of videos and lead a discussion about it. I could create videos and lead a discussion about them. I think there's also a huge amount to be done in like writing and reading different like blog posts from different experiences. So kind of getting out there and like just getting your name out. So, you know, I wrote for Believe Perform quite early on, making sure that you are, you know, find out if anyone in PhD land needs help with any research. That's all usually pretty welcome if people need some extra kind of data analysis or things transcribed. You know, sometimes you can get involved just like meeting more people that way. And then I also found that I actually found a physiotherapy clinic and said, would you like to have a sports psychologist just like listed on your website? So that people could come, you know, if they Googled you, they saw that like I was there too. Actually, that was a win-win for both of us. So I've done things like that. And I think being really also upfront and going, online sessions work. We can do online sessions. So being, you know, people are like a little bit wary about that and just going, this is how we work. It's really successful. Don't worry about it. It's now the only option, but it's okay. And so being really upfront about those things as well. And so just saying, you know, I'm offering these sessions, but I'm offering these sessions in a way that is unique because of X, Y, and Z. You know, so for me, I would talk about, you know, I've lived and breathed a fear-based sport in gymnastics. I've also done a sport like swimming, which is like super like technical and grit-based, I would say. You know, I have different work in different arenas. My life experience has taught me that, you know, there's lots of things that you can kind of bring to the table. And I think if you are literally willing to start with a club next door and say, I want to do a series on this, you know, maybe it's, you know, go beyond goal setting. I think that's also the first thing, as I would say, is it's fine to do goal setting, imagery, and self-talk. And boy, have I given a lot of talks on those topics. But, you know, be creative. What else can you do? What else is impactful? What can you do that kind of pushes your boundaries? So you have to really read about a topic. You know, what do you understand about what happens in the brain during choking under pressure? Do you understand the different hemispherical activations? That's really key. You know, get that right. And so I think every time you give a workshop, challenge yourself to try a different topic. That I've also learned a lot about, because when you teach something, that's really when you become quite good at it. So I would say is make sure you're you can also make lots of slides. I think in downtime, I make tons of different slides. Then when I get hired for something, I'm not like trying to create a new deck. So I would say do things like that can be really, really helpful. Just like different templates. I've got a ton of slides on how do you build confidence. I think my area that I would do the most on is self-esteem and confidence. So what activities can you find that would do that for someone? So like having some time to think about those things that you can do online is really key, because I found when I first started, people were like, make resilient athletes, make mentally tough athletes. I was like, how? I don't understand. Yeah. And actually it's like, okay, so for some athletes, that confidence is every single day they write down something they've done well at training, something they're proud of, something they worked on. They showed up to training. Maybe just showing up for them was a lot. You know, they create some sort of tangible list with all of that in there. Recognize, you know, I'm a huge fan of the tangible. So I have kids making paper chains constantly with different things that they've accomplished, so that when they get to a swim meet, hopefully they have like a paper chain that goes around their room the night before the competition. You know, I have different, you know, like zoom out as a mantra, understanding this idea of trending. I'm a big fan of really cheesy quotes as well. So I'm constantly like saying, like, two of my favorite quotes are, worrying is like a rocking chair. It gives you something to do, but it doesn't get you anywhere. And I'll have lots of discussion with kids on what does that mean. My other one is you have to earn your shower. I had a coach say that to me once. And earn your shower means if you're injured or can't do the work that you're doing, how could you using creativity, earn your shower? How do you get sweaty? And actually that's what I worked on with. Does that make sense? So, and that's been a really interesting one during lockdown specifically. I will say to athletes, how are you going to earn your shower today? And like, it's a funky one, but it's actually really resonated with lots of athletes. So real, finding different really meaningful quotes and what works for you as a practitioner, I think is you could use that time to do a lot of that and really honing those skills, because everyone sat through a SMART goals lecture. What can you do that's more than that? And I think that you can use that time to show that you can leave an audience going like, whoa, like that's impressive. So calling local businesses as well. And there's a cycling cafe near me. I've hosted events there before. Find places that are sporty, find gyms that are struggling right now and say, hey, can I talk to you, all of your PTs who work there, all of your staff, and say, do you know anything about performance psychology? Could we using this time to upskill you on all that? I mean, I think there's a million grassroots places where you could be working together and being really, really creative.
That's really interesting what you said about how you really in this time is you need to be creative in order to get your message out there and get some CPD and employment.
I think the creativity. So the best advice I ever got as a practitioner was, you can only be the best version of you. You'll always be a second best version of someone else. So if you try and be Richard Keegan, I will only be a second best version of Richard Keegan. He'll always be the best version, but I can be the very best version of me. And that's really powerful, because it means that if you find techniques and tips and tricks that work for your athletes, once you've digested all of the expertise from the reading, you can really gain a lot of confidence. And people, if you're confident, you exude that to your athlete. And that's really important. So I think that using this time to be confident, and to be confident, you have to be vulnerable at first, to be like, okay, what do I not know? And really being like, I know I have a master's in this, but for me, one of the things that always trips me up is like epistemological and ontological approaches to things. And I'm like, okay, got to review that again. I have to review that once a month. Like, I just have to, one more time, and understanding that, but being vulnerable and going, that's hard for me. And I don't get it sometimes. And I get it in one context and not another. And so really making sure that you're honest with yourself in this time about what you don't know, because you could leave this time an expert in many, many different areas.
Yeah, that's what you said there is quite poignant and interesting. What I would like to know, or many other people would like to know now, is how do you think psychology will change from this? How do you think the lockdown will affect the field of sports psychology?
So I hope that we can see how oddly taking, when everything gets taken away, that we love what we do. Some of us are motivated for the wrong things, but most of us have like really been grateful for our sports. But I think that I'm hopeful that sports psychology can be seen as more than useful when the competition is in 2 weeks from now, that we can use it in a proactive way. We can realize that if we start 6 months out, or integrate it within a philosophical kind of mantra within the team of going, we use sports psychology, not to fill the gaps, but to like lay the foundation of what we believe in, then we can really move our field forward. Because I do feel that sometimes we get stagnated because of time constraints. You're somewhere 1 day a week for 6 months out of the year, and that's all you got. And that's a lot. Sometimes you get an hour workshop, and that's all you have. That's all these athletes have. So I think that I'm hopeful that moving forward, because unfortunately the mental health ramifications, the mental ill health ramifications during this lockdown will show us that we need a basis in sports psychology within every team, because sports psychology can offer both mental well-being and the optimized mindset for performance.
So it's that raising awareness of sports psychology.
Yeah, I think raising awareness of sports psychology and in a way that really is like, what does sports psychology actually do? That goes beyond mental skills and sees our field as one of psychology, kind of first and foremost. And I think that is really what I would hope we get out of this.
So it's like reconnecting sports psychology back to the rest of the field of psychology.
Yeah, no, that's nicely put. I think exactly that, because I think sometimes we forget, it's Mental Health Awareness Week right now as we film this, and it's realizing, how can we be, we're part of that, how do we, keep that dialogue open, and realizing that as sports psychologists, we are privy to a lot of the manifestations of mental ill health within sport that clinical psychology may not be aware of. One of my favorite examples, I mean, it's not a happy example, but it's really a really poignant one, is I had an athlete once who was depressed, and wouldn't see the counselor that was in her region. We were really working on that, but it went undiagnosed for so long. And one of the reasons is because she was still going to training, her personal hygiene, her sport required her to be in a pool. And because she was getting in and out of a pool every day, she seemed well groomed and put together. And it wasn't until I Skyped her and saw her room that I realized there was no more personal hygiene. But she'd kind of faked it for so long to everybody else. And because her normal base was going to training, everyone went, she's fine. Because by a clinical standpoint, training 20, 30 hours a week would be like, oh, she's high functioning, she's absolutely fine. And I was like, no, that's her base. And actually, she's dropped below that. She's not really feeding herself. She's not washing. She's not cleaning her room. She's not going to classes. She's not doing anything. So realizing that mental ill health can present itself within athletes, it can look very different. And I think that is really, really key to understanding that that's also how sports psychologists can be used, is we have a level of understanding and awareness about what this kind of manifestation can look like.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And just to hark back to a few months ago, there was a really big thing about sports stars coming out and talking about their own mental health problems. I remember seeing a few online, especially the runner from the Channel Islands, Gemma Dawkins, talking about her own personal struggles with anxiety and depression. I thought it was quite interesting. It was stuck within a really nice Instagram post, perfectly posed Instagram picture of bright neon style. So it was kind of counterproductive to actually what the image was about, but it was still a poignant message in a way. So yeah, it's that I feel like possibly in sport itself, we don't necessarily talk about that mental health aspect that is still rather keen and actually probably more important for athletes and sports stars in general because of the nature of their sport. You hear of people like with cricket having to live out of a suitcase 8 months of the year and not being able to see their families, and what's the impact upon their mental health. And it's something that really we ought to talk about more.
And I think it's talking about it more, but I think there's this, we're missing a nuance a little bit, because I think sometimes when we talk about mental ill health and depression and anxiety, we're expecting to see something almost stereotypical. We're like, oh, if they're depressed, they're not going to get out of bed, or it's going to, it's going to look in a certain way, that because there is more dialogue about mental health, which is great, but I'm not quite sure it is nuanced enough yet to make sure that when an athlete presents with something, maybe it's refusing to show up to training on time, or it's something, going, instead of just being angry at that person, going, what's going on for you? What obstacles are in your life right now? What's going on there? And recognizing how that might actually look for an athlete. And I think, one of the things that it's been hard during this coronavirus time is people have kind of said, well, there'll be, team Zoom calls for lots of different teams right now. And people go, oh, well, some people aren't engaging. And it's like, well, why do you think they're not engaging? Are people having anxiety about being on camera? Are people feeling like actually every time they get on, they're comparing themselves to their teammates, and that's really upsetting to them, and they're not feeling like as productive or as successful as their teammates? Maybe they've got a household right now where there isn't a room where they can quietly Zoom anyone anyway. What's going on? And I think that asking that question of realizing that someone's kind of mental well-being is such a driver for mindset, for just day-to-day little things. And, opening the mail might be a huge deal for somebody, which in the athlete world, remembering to put shin pads in the bag might be a really big deal. We don't know where they're coming from. And I think that recognizing those things are really important because it doesn't always fit into this neat box of what we think mental ill health always looks like. And I think we just have to be more nuanced and more careful about what that means. And then the step beyond that is going, sometimes someone's mental ill health is quote unquote inconvenient. Maybe it means they're never on time to training. Maybe they need special attention. Maybe they're disruptive at training. So we have to also be willing to kind of work with them on that and understand where we put that care in relation to the team and everything, and balancing all of that. And that's really hard, really, really hard. And so I think that we have to be careful when we talk about mental health awareness of just not going, anxiety and depression and eating disorders exist. Of course they do. But I think we know that now. And they exist for males and females and everyone. And I think that that's an incredibly important thing to realize, that what does the nuance look like? And how do we, as sports psychologists, signpost it? And then also as parents and coaches and athletes, how do they vocalize that help? Because sometimes people don't realize the reason they're acting out at training is because they're anxious. And you sometimes need to be able to tease that out of them.
Yeah, that's I can kind of relate to that. I remember watching a TED talk, and you talk about the nuance, and they had a prominent woman who was a feminist, and she was talking about, okay, mental health is an issue for men and the men's rights movement, but it's an issue that's shared by the families, the couples, the wives of those men who are ill or mentally ill, and it's a problem that is shared. And you talk about that affect the nuances. How do we tackle that, and how do we get the context correct and right?
Yeah. And I think sometimes we, as organizations, we want to be helpful to those with mental ill health, but like only to a point. I am finding roadblocks of it's all kind of fine until your starting striker needs 2 weeks off of training for her mental health. And then what do we do?
Yeah, I can see the point, and I can imagine for the elite athletes as well, hearing the likes of someone like Jack Green, who was a 400-meter hurdler, needs a year out because of to fix their mental health. How's the media going to react, and then how's the probably utilizing a more prominent sport, let's say football, for instance, how's the media going to react knowing that a Z player is going to be out a year to fix mental health? Or
and that same media outlet will today put out a lovely spread about mental health, awareness week, and it will, so we're kind of halfway there. There's parts of us that are there, and then it falls down a bit. It's an interesting one. So it's not that I think part of this we're actually really we have nailed, and then part of this we have a long way to go.
Exactly. Like I remember the Sun were going to release when Frank Bruno came out with depression, they were going to release a title saying Bonkers Bruno, and they had to change it within hours before publishing the actual article. Mind you, that was, bearing in mind, I thought that was about 10 years ago, so things have changed.
Yeah.
So yeah, very interesting what you said. And guys, if you're watching this, what we really want to know is, partly, if you can comment down below, what is your philosophical or theoretical perspectives around sports psychology, and when do you feel like they need to change? And also, what are the obstacles you're finding, especially in lockdown? Could be outside of lockdown, could be quarantine, could be doing your university work. What are the obstacles to your productivity, and what's preventing you from being productive? Or what is the feeling of being productive? Are you being too productive? If you could comment that down below, that'd be wicked. Also, if you could give us a subscribe, that'd also be really cool and would really help the DSET Northern Hub out a lot in terms of reaching a new audience or a wider audience. So talking about coming out of quarantine and talking about your recommendations, what suggestions do you have to new applied practitioners?
So I think it's find a supervisor, if you're going to go into stage 2, find a supervisor that really gels with you. I think I wasn't, I found one that worked for me, but I didn't think I didn't know I could shop around. So you can, shop around, find ones that work for you in all the senses of kind of an emotional connection, but also like logistically when and where they meet. Realizing that you have to be proactive in finding work and finding clients. No one is going to do that for you. Not a supervisor, not anyone. There's not going to be, you're not going to shadow anybody in a sense that you can't be in one-to-one sessions. Like, you might be able to come to a workshop, but I might be giving one in Glasgow, so you have to get to Glasgow, or whatever that means. So I think, being really proactive in like, how can I be involved? And I think that, what life experiences do you have that lend yourself to that? Are you a good writer? And so you could be involved by, writing material for a club. Are you someone who can do online videos? Are you someone who can do, have you ever done any, like, have you ever worked in a gym or a personal training setting? Could you be working with personal trainers? I gave a talk once at Orange Theory Fitness, for example. I've given talks at Lululemon, like going into different clubs and organizations outside of strict sport and going into the exercise world is also a great place to kind of really stretch your wings and get to grips with some new concepts. So I think finding a supervisor you really gel with, and then realizing, do you want to take 2 years, 3 years, 4 years to finish stage 2? That's a really big difference. What other work can you do to complement? So for me, it was coaching. Maybe there's a mental health charity you also want to work with. Maybe there's other things that you could be doing within the sphere of either sport or psychology or mental health, that it kind of, complements what you're doing and gives you more confidence kind of working within an organization as well.
So looking into the next stages of your life, going into the new normal, coming out of the lockdown, what areas are you looking to improve?
So for me, I've got a PhD to finish, so that'll be one of the first things for me I got to get done. But I think one of the things I know. So I think one of the things that I want to improve is I do lots of reflection. And one of the things I reflected on this past year is I got so busy that when I reached out to clients and said, "You doing okay?" Because especially if they were a funded client, so they have funded sessions with me, but they don't have to see me, but I just kind of check in with them. Yeah. I would maybe check in, yeah, I'm fine. And I would go, okay, and move on because I was so busy. And I wasn't doing enough due diligence of going, hey, even though you're fine, let's just like catch up for 20 minutes on next Thursday. Hey, let's just, let's just spend a moment having a quick chat, or, whoa, what makes things good right now? I wasn't doing that follow-up because I got so busy. I had said yes to too much that I felt like I wasn't giving 100% to every area I was working in. So I want to really improve by picking the things that I can really be great at, and making sure that I don't do too much, because it's hard, right? People ask for help and you want to give it. And you want to grow your practice in like a logistical sense, but you also just like, someone comes to you who's like works in a new sport you've never worked in. You're like, oh my gosh, awesome. I'll take them on. I've never worked in polo or whatever it is. And like, I'll do that. And so, but recognizing that sometimes silence from clients is a good thing and sometimes it's a bad thing. So making sure that I have that extra time to give that extra energy to really delve a little bit more depth rather than breadth. Yeah. I think that's kind of where I'm looking to go next year.
Where do you think sports psychology would go into the new normal? Where do you think the future of sports psychology is?
Well, I think there's a huge plus in that hopefully online sessions will actually continue, because I think it's a great way to work, and logistically makes a lot of sense. I have athletes who don't live far away from me in London, but actually would prefer it because they need to like eat their dinner after training, would actually prefer we do our session as they eat dinner. So I think that as a new normal is really helpful. And I think people, it also allows clubs to maybe hire a few more people, and realizing that, we want to be in person when we can, we don't always have to be. And I'm hopeful that in this time they're horrible, but we've all suffered more kind of mental health challenges. I think every single person has been affected in that sense. So I think there'll be a new understanding of making sure that we have the right kind of mental health support and mindset support moving forward. And I think that in the new normal, we won't take things like that for granted.
So the next question, if you could go back in time and give yourself advice, what advice would you give yourself?
Sounds a bit cliche now, but I really think there's something on just trusting the process. Because one of the great, I saw another, I'm always full of bad quotes, but so one of the quotes I saw the other day that was like, past you really wanted to be where you are right now. And that's really true. I get to do sports psychology every day, which was, as I said, my goal. And so I think actually just like looking back and saying, you're going to get there, and you're going to get there with confidence, and you're going to get there and feel good about what you're doing. I think I would just kind of tell myself that, because I think I was in a rush to tick off maybe certain things where there's not a rush to tick off different, having worked in this sport and stuff. It's just about how can you be really good at what you do in that moment. And I think recognizing that, don't be afraid to go, God, I don't know. I am unaware of that area, and I don't get it. And one of the hardest things I've had to do is sometimes you go into organizations and they'll be like, we're super into, I don't want to say an example because it'll give it away, but they'll be like, let's say it's resilience, because everyone loves it. We're like, our mantra is create resilience. And you're like, you start to realize that maybe that organization doesn't even know what they mean by that. So you're allowed to question, what do you mean by that? Because I remember not being like, oh, I should know how to do that. Being like, actually, it turned out that organization didn't know what it meant by resilience. So it was kind of like, actually, how can I build something if I don't know what you want from me? And so being confident in that kind of autonomy and to ask those questions, going, you're not a bad sports psychologist if you're like, what do you mean? Because they probably read one pop psych book and loved it, and that's fine, but they don't really know. You're the expert there, and you're allowed to go, hold on, I think I know what I'm talking about. Can you just clarify what you need from me?
Yeah, it's I think, like you said, resilience and that mental toughness is really a big pop word in terms of many of the organizations. You hear about them a lot. They want to create those athletes who are mentally tough, who are resilient, but probably don't necessarily know what that means or have an understanding, or maybe their understanding is different to other organizations.
Yes. And I think being confident your training does get you to that point, and realizing that in the process you do create resilient, mentally tough athletes. It is possible, and you can do it using some mental skills, but it's a lot for me of Socratic questioning and trying out different tips and techniques and training and things like that. So I think that, if you can kind of trust yourself to get athletes to those kind of higher order bits of sports psychology, then it's fine. But I think when I walked into my first jobs, I was like, I felt only armed with mental skills. And so I felt like if they didn't ask for those, I felt really nervous. So I always call like upskilling, like things like, we talked about trending earlier and zooming out, writing zoom out in a water bottle is self-talk, right? We're not going it's not new, and recognizing, actually, I'm not using anything like drastically new or different there, but it's not just, it's explaining it differently, and it's tying it to a greater context.
What advice would you give international students looking to do the international pathway program into sports psychology, especially in the UK and BPS route?
Sorry, my headphones have just died. 1 second.
Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me there?
I can hear you, yeah. Hello?
I wouldn't necessarily recommend the international pathway. I think if you can follow the route and the rules, you end up with just less roadblocks. But if you've already started down it, like just knowing that it exists is really helpful, and knowing that you can, Google for it and what questions to Google. Like I said in the beginning, so many people were just like, well, why didn't you look it up? And it's like, if you don't know what to look for, how can you possibly look something up? And so realizing that was huge for me. And I think that I would give the advice to people that it's expensive. This is slow. Like my first year, I think I made like a few £100 in sports psychology. It was probably not until my full second year doing it, like full calendar year doing it, that I made enough to live on and I could stop coaching. And it wasn't like a comfortable amount. So, you know, it's realizing like the financial things that go into this as well. It's not a sport. You know, sometimes people think that they're going to work in, because footballers make a lot of money, that you're going to end up doing that. So I think actually recognizing those bits are really important, and having some sort of dual career to kind of help you along your way to be sure that you can be doing your best work. And then I think also just, yeah, I wouldn't recommend the international route, but I also would say is like, the BPS will say no, because the red tape says no. Even if you can present all the same coursework as somebody else that they've done, you kind of have to be, especially coming from the US, where there's kind of a culture of like, make exceptions for people. And it's a little bit, there's a cultural difference there. So just recognizing that like red tape will say no, and the British bureaucracy is there for a reason. It's to ensure high standards, but not getting caught up in that and going, how can I go about this in a different way? I can still be good at my job in other ways. You know, financially also, stage 2 may not be an option for people. So how can you ethically practice and still work in sports psychology, but just, you know, in a slightly different tilt, to allow yourself to do that and do the career you want without, you know, the 5, 6, 7, 8, 10,000 pounds that sometimes stage 2 can cost.
Yeah, it's really good what you said, and it's everything you've mentioned so far has been hopefully really good for everyone listening and watching, and it hopefully helps them. What we want to know is, like I've probably mentioned this before, but trust the process of what is your philosophical and theoretical perspectives around sports psychology, and when do you feel like you need to adapt those philosophies? And also what we would like to know, guys, you can comment this down below. What are your obstacles to productivity? What's preventing you being productive? Before we continue, do you have any plugs you want to mention?
Let's see. So, I don't know when, I'm not quite sure when this is coming out, but we have an event that we're doing on post-traumatic growth on the 3rd of June. I'm going to double check that date. Yes, Wednesday, the 3rd of June. That's on post-traumatic growth, and that's a really interesting. Sam Bullock, who's a Paralympic silver medalist, is going to speak about her experience there, and my colleague Serena McLeod is going to talk about her experience working with Paralympians and in disabled sport and accessible sport and inclusive sport and all of those kind of nuanced areas. And so that should be a really interesting evening and talk, I think, really salient as well for people in this time. How can we grow from things like that? So we have that event coming up. And then we also recently hosted how to become a sports psychologist, and we're hoping to do, that was really well received. So we're going to host another event this summer so people can look out for that, and also hosting an event on things like, you know, what do you do in your first sessions with clients, and a little bit of CPD around that. So all of that, I'll be tweeting it out, and on our website, on our events page, should be there as well. And then all of the resources and videos I've spoken about today that I've done for Swimmingland are also on the resources bit of my website, which is optimisepotentialsport.com.
Okay, so what we will do, we will note that down below. We will stick that within the links itself, so anyone watching this YouTube video can easily access to that. Also, if you could access or visit this is brought to you by the British Psychological Society, DSET Northern Hub, or Northern Applied Hub, sorry. We've got our Twitter page at DSET Northern Applied Hub. We'll link that down below as well. We'll also link to the Facebook page and the Instagram pages where you can find more content, more about us, and potentially more about the events that we run in particular, and the specific biannual journal that we also release. More information about that when that comes out. Also, guys, if you could, obviously being coronavirus lockdown and the coronavirus is affecting the world, all I can say is stay safe, be safe. I hope you learn everything that you gain something from this video. And I will see you in the next one. And it's also goodbye from Hannah.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
You're welcome.